Welcome to another episode of CollectaThoughts, and today I bring you another Yu-Gi-Oh game, but this one is a bit different. This is called Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duel Dawn of the Battle Royale, and this is in fact not the traditional Yu-Gi-Oh! Game you might be used to. It is technically a whole new card game, but it does also use a lot of the previous rules and some of the previous designs from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! So basically this is Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duel, if you're wondering. Dawn of the Battle Royale, which is a horrible name, is simply the subtitle of this specific video game. Because of how I organize stuff, this is gonna come out in the middle of a bunch of other Yu-Gi-Oh! Reviews, so that's kinda funny. But since it is such a different game, hopefully this isn't too annoying for people who don't like Yu-Gi-Oh! And are subscribed. The 30 of you who are. Regardless though, I'm gonna try to approach this as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player or casual player and try to explain it through that perspective while still being accessible enough to maybe someone who doesn't really know anything about Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I'm pretty sure a big part of this game is to attract that crowd. And so the basic gameplay of Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duel is two players playing against each other and trying to reduce the life points of the opposing player to 0 to win, which is the primary way, even though there are other scenarios that can happen. But again, I want to try and keep this simple. Keeping on that simplicity, then the way you go about reducing your opponent's life points is by summoning monsters to battle your opponent's monsters or attack him directly for what usually is the max amount of damage to their life points. With of course the magic and trap cards, which give a much higher level of complexity of what can happen in each game, besides, monsters just kinda hitting their heads against each other. Now, comparing Rush Duel to regular Yu-Gi-Oh! There are some major changes, with the primary one and most noticeable one being the new board, now only having 3 instead of 5 slots for monsters and spell cards, which is very reminiscent of course of Duel Links, which is already kind of a shortened version of Yu-Gi-Oh! But still plays with all the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! While here the major rules that are changed are in the drawing and summoning of cards. In regular Yu-Gi-Oh! You can normal summon a monster once per turn, and you can draw 1 card at your draw phase. Instead here in Rush Duels, you can summon as many monsters as you want within a turn, that including filling up all your spots and still doing a tribute summon, for example. So as long as the monster allows it or you have the space, you can pretty much always summon regardless. No real need for special summons here, from the hand at least. This of course being done during the main phase, and the reason why I bring that up is because another difference from this is the lack of a second main phase after the battle phase. For those who don't know, the battle phase is where your monsters can attack, because it's a battle phase. It's pretty self-explanatory actually. But in regular Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a second main phase which allows you to do some plays after you dump the attacking phase. But here there isn't, meaning that after the battle phase it's the end phase, much like once again Duel Links. The other major difference as well is deriving from the draw phase, which I already mentioned before. And much like the summons here, there is basically no limit as you draw until you have 5 cards every turn, which means there's a lot less managing of resources, or maybe a better way to say it would be now there's a completely different way of managing resources, which in general play rewards completely spending your hand, since you'll get a refresh one in the next turn, compared to the more conservative original Yu-Gi-Oh! Which bets a lot more on you saving your resources because, well, you can only draw a card per turn. By the way, nothing I'm saying here is saying that one is better than the other. They are simply different, as I think this new idea adds a new level of chance and a lot more of managing what you should keep in your hand. Since any card you don't use, that's 1 less card you'll draw the next turn, and with a smaller board size that means you can just pull all your cards on the table, except for the first turn, which does kinda end up happening a lot. Not that it's a major issue, and if the goal here is to make something that is like Yu-Gi-Oh! But maybe slightly faster and also more casual, dare I say, then this does seem to be the right way to take. I will mention more on the casual aspects of this, which to be fair I'm not sure exist due to the intent of this game or because of its infancy, given I believe that Rush Duel at this point is still under 2 years old, which if we compare the original Yu-Gi-Oh! In the same time, it was probably at a similar state of development. But also you have to address that Rush Duel is based on Yu-Gi-Oh!, which means it's probably made with the consciousness of all that development made previously. But also that it is something new and, take all of that into consideration. Now let's address some of the other changes I've noticed and some of the new things in this game. Try and understand what makes this game more casual or just different, aside from the main gimmicks of summoning and drawing limitations, or lack thereof. First thing I noticed is the changes to spell cards and trap cards. While playing this game, I didn't find a single continuous trap card. I didn't find any quick effect spell card. I haven't 100%ed the game and I haven't gotten every card, but I will say that I've gotten most cards, at least more than half. And these type of more distinct trap and spell cards don't seem to be here. And the reason I think this is happening is because of the way that now effects of cards are laid out, both for monster effects, spells and traps. Now things are displayed with a requirement and an effect. The requirement being of course what you need to have to use this card, and then of course the effect being what this card does. I actually think this is a really good change from original Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it leaves a lot less to interpretation. Often the cost and effect of a card could be misread or misinterpreted by players to a meaningful degree, but here because they are separate, it does again make it a lot simpler and easier to understand. Another change to the game overall that relates to this is that effect monsters can use their effects once per turn, meaning that regardless of what the effect is, it doesn't just happen when it's summoned or destroyed or flipped, which once again adds a level of simplicity and clarity at the cost of more complexity in these strategies, which for me as someone that comes from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a bit disappointing and does make the game a bit more boring in my opinion. But I also think that it wouldn't be terribly hard to add a lot of these options back into the game if they so want to, which I don't know if they do. For example, a flip summon or a flip effect could be very easily written into the requirement area of a card. But I guess only time will tell. And this is it for the kind of explaining what this game is like in a very simplified way, and above that explaining how it compares to the original Yu-Gi-Oh! This is definitely not a substitute, but it is something new that still kind of plays like Yu-Gi-Oh! In a lot of ways. Now into the actual features of this as a video game, well, I'll be honest, I feel like this is a bit of a cheap licensed game type of thing. It doesn't seem to have the quality of even other Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that have been announced recently. I mean, you put this graphics next to the Master Duel and you tell me which one looks better. It doesn't look bad, but it is very simplistic. The actual graphics of the board are fine. They're a bit too flashy, probably to hide kind of the simplicity of them, but you can also just turn off a lot of it in the options, which is nice. Make it a more, streamlined and clean experience. And I say that because that might actually be something you want to do. I found that, with all the options turned on, that the monsters just kind of had too much things going on. They tried to make their art pop out and make some dynamic lighting around the card, which sounds nice, and it is for the first time you see it. But then it also kind of makes it harder to tell which card you're selecting and things of that nature. So while it is something you get used to, it is something I prefer to turn off. Other things I rather turn off is also a lot of the animations. I feel like they just make the game run slower, as in pacing wise. Having to watch all these animations for every little thing you do when you really just want to, put some cards down and attack. The only one I didn't turn off, and it was for the sake of this review, was the special animations ones. Basically, some cards, and surprisingly quite a lot of them, have special animations. This is usually for what are called boss monsters, which are basically the strongest cards in your deck, usually. And so, because it's usually a bit of an event to get them on the field, not so much in this game because it's so easy to summon monsters, but still, regardless, these are more important cards, and when it happens, you get this 3D animation of that monster, which looks alright. I'll be honest, they look nice. It's very reminiscent of both Duel Links and even the earlier Tag Force games on the PSP, which had similar animations, but I think they lack on the sound design side. They just kind of keep playing the music of the game, and that makes it a bit awkward. For example, if it's a robot, it doesn't make robot noises, or you hear the size of it, because most of these monsters are huge, but because they're kind of muted, you don't really feel the presence that they should have. I think adding things like those noises of just creatures moving and roars from those creatures, I think would have added so much to it, but it's clear that this is very much a budgeted game, and you can tell that as well from the 3D graphics of the game. When you're not in Duel, you're in the world of the game, which is based on the Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's anime, which is also the anime that introduced this card game. And in terms of looks, it just kind of looks like a normal city. It's not very inspired game design, but to be fair here, I have not watched Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's, so I don't really know if maybe this is just what the town in that anime looks like, maybe. Regardless of any of that though, it does look cheap. You can tell that it doesn't have a whole lot of budget into it, and to be fair, to me that's fine. I'm not really playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For the 3D running around bits, especially when they really only serve to progress the plot and also, challenge other people to play against you. And by other people, I mean AI. You can play online, but honestly, I don't think you really want to play online before you finish the campaign. And the reason for that is because, you only unlock Create a Deck after you've beaten the campaign, which I think is such a weird idea. Why isn't Create a Deck just on from the beginning of the game? Especially since you can buy so many cards and buy so many customization items for your deck boxes and your character. It just feels weird that you can't do it earlier. It really makes the campaign feel like a really long tutorial. Now, if you're wondering how the hell you even play before then, you have decks that you can acquire throughout the game, or more precisely lists of decks. And you can use those decks if you have all the cards in them, of course, with each of these lists being ranked in stars out of 5, with the higher ratings being, of course, with cards that are rarer and harder to find, making it so there is some level of progression, as early on in the game you'll only really be able to play with 1-star decks, 2-star decks, and then by the end of the game usually you'd hope you can play with a 5-star one. In fact, actually they just give you one of them. And an important thing to mention when they do introduce you this 5-star deck is also one of the new mechanics that is exclusive to Rush Duel, which is called Maximum Summon. Basically, these work by having 3 specific cards in your hand that can be fused together, making this special monster that occupies all spaces on the board for monsters. So when you do this maximum summon, any monster on your board gets destroyed, and also you can't have any other monster on the board besides it. This is of course a disadvantage because you only have one monster on the board, but these will also be some of the highest stat monsters in the game. And not only that, but they also have special abilities with them, which are based on each card that they have. Given they are composed of 3 cards, they usually have 3 abilities. And it definitely seems that this is what the game wants you to build your deck around, these being clearly boss monsters. And to be fair, it's quite cool in the way that they can be set on a board and they kind of make a full image with the 3 arts combined, but also because you only have 1 attack at that point, and it's a pretty high attack to be fair, so when you do a maximum summon, you're probably expecting to end the game in a few turns. Is it a gimmick? Well, I don't know. I guess I would have to see more of it, because In this game, I've only seen a couple of maximum summons. During the main campaign, you only see 2 of them, and that's the ones I've seen so far. One is the one you get from the game story, and the other is the main villain, of course. Regardless though, I do think they have potential. It is to be seen yet what will be done with this and what can be done with this. Currently, my main gripe with it is, why would I want a single powerful monster on the field when maybe I could have multiple slightly less powerful monsters that have a whole lot more flexibility due to them being separate cards and just having multiple attacks, of course. The only really major advantage of these maximum summons is, of course, the stat usually being higher, but also just how easy it is to summon them, because all you need is to have all 3 cards in your hand. And since you can be summoning 5 cards every turn, that does make it quite easy. But it also adds the disadvantage of, if you don't have all cards in your hand, usually these cards separately are a bit useless. So they can very easily become duds in your hand, clogging up, possible draws you could have. Since in most scenarios you would want to get rid of them, since you want to, keep them in your hand until you have all 3 of them. But there are ways around this, as I've already noticed, especially with the deck they provide you for this game that does have one of these monsters. So once again, it's a question of seeing where does this go. But as it sits here in this game, it's definitely just more of a novelty or an introduction to these cards, especially to Western Yu-Gi-Oh fans, which haven't really had access to any of this Rush Duel stuff up until this game, officially at least. Regardless, going back to this game and maybe talk a bit about the story, well, it's whatever. It's a tournament. They call it a Battle Royale because, that word has become a buzzword. They just kind of use it every time they can use the word tournament. They will use Battle Royale instead, even if it doesn't make any sense. And that's definitely the case here. It's just a tournament. I don't know why they call it a Battle Royale. And as a tournament story, there's not a whole lot going on here. I couldn't tell you any name for the characters in this game. I barely could tell you any of their personalities. I haven't watched Yu-Gi-Oh! 7, so maybe if I had, then maybe I would have some connection to this. But as it is, it really just kind of feels like a kid's game in that kind of outside 3D world. And honestly, this outside 3D world really is just a means to traverse and start duels, as most things can be done from the menu, including buying cars and buying cosmetics. Cosmetics here being mostly just your deck box. You can create your deck box with your deck and you can just set the art you want, even though a lot of the art can be just weirdly expensive for no reason, especially since it's mostly just art of other cards. It's reused art. There's not a whole lot of original art for these boxes, which is fine. Personally, the better thing here is the cosmetic of the playmat. I think a cool idea that they do here is the idea that you can set a background and then a foreground, which will be usually a monster. It's simple, but it basically allows you to make your own playmat, which I think is kind of a neat idea. You can also do your sleeves, of course, but once again, this is just mostly art from cards, which is fine, but even Duel Links, a free-to-play game on your phone, goes beyond that in customization. So, well, in a lot of ways it does make sense. One is a free-to-play game that's trying to get you to spend money to get customizables, while this one already has your money because you already bought it. Regardless though, as far as buying cards go, this one is fine. You can buy packs. There's isn't a whole lot of cards in this game yet. I believe it's less than 1,000 right now. So when compared to Yu-Gi-Oh's like 10,000 unique cards, maybe it doesn't sound very impressive, but 718 is not a bad number of cards, even if as a Yu-Gi-Oh player that most of these do come from regular Yu-Gi-Oh! And they've just been adapted to this one. In fact, some of the more recognizable cards may even get a special treatment here by having a legend label on them. which is cool, I guess. And there's also a Rush Rare, a new rarity added to the game, which is a step above Ultra Rare, which you might be used to from other Yu-Gi-Oh games. And here it mostly seems to be used for boss monsters and some more iconic spell and trap cards, like for example Trap Hole and Pot of Greed are Rush Rare cards. And I think that's kind of about it, honestly. There isn't a whole lot going on. In the campaign, you mostly just duel a bunch of people. There's also duel quizzes in the menu, which, once again, if you play Duel Links, you might be familiar with, but I believe there was also other Yu-Gi-Oh games that had this feature. And basically, these are puzzles using the Yu-Gi-Oh rules, or in this case, the Rush Duel rules. Soundtrack wise, to kind of finish this off, well, it's in the same tier as the graphics, as in cheap looking, cheap sounding in this case, I guess. You're definitely not gonna be playing this game for the sound or the graphics. So, it is what it is. And that's kind of a shame because I do think there is quite a lot of interesting things in this game with this new type of Yu-Gi-Oh gameplay. But unfortunately, it really feels like this new gameplay is carrying everything else, since everything else is just bland for the most part. And for those reasons, I am giving Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duel Dawn of the Battle Royale a 6 out of 10. It is a cool new gameplay in the Yu-Gi-Oh! World, but the game itself is a bit simplistic looking and it doesn't have a whole lot going for it besides that, which to be fair is the main attraction of the game. And that's why I still very much gave it a positive score. Now in terms of recommendations, which I think in this case are a lot more important than the actual score of the game. Well, if you're new to Yu-Gi-Oh, honestly, I don't think this is the place to enter. I think maybe Duel Links is a better experience and it's free. I just find it very weird that you can't create your deck from the beginning and you have to play with pre-made decks, which sounds good for new players who maybe don't know how to build a deck yet, but it's not like these lists of decks are new to the game. They've always been there, but they were optional, while here they're making you play with them no matter what, which I think is definitely a step back. And honestly, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links will not make you do that. He won't do that to you. That being said, going back to if you're new to Yu-Gi-Oh, another option would be Legacy of the Duelist on the Switch as well, which if you're watching this review, maybe it's a console you have. This one is also on a bunch of other platforms though, if the Switch is not your console. And that one is definitely for maybe people who want to get into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they were big fans of the anime, as that game kind of goes through a lot of nostalgic battles in the series, while still having quite a lot of challenge of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But much like this one, focusing more on pre-made decks, and that one, of course, for the reasons that you're kind of playing through specific battles that happened. So in that way, it actually ends up being good for a new player, because you don't have to worry about making decks while still playing with various different decks throughout the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! While still having the option to make your own deck and play around in different modes outside of the story. Man, Legacy of the Duelist is a good game. I wish I had reviewed it. Regardless though, if you are a Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan, then definitely if you're looking for more Yu-Gi-Oh! I would say go to that previously mentioned one, Legacy of the Duelist. You should really only go for Rush Duel if that's what you want to try, because you've been hearing about it or it's been on your radar for a while, like it was for me. Since this is currently the only official way to experience this game for those of us in the West who also don't know Japanese. That's an important thing as well. Regardless though, that is kind of the gist of it. If you want to try out Rush Duels because you've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For a while, then this is the only way for you to do it legally at the moment. And if you're new to Yu-Gi-Oh! I would honestly urge you to try and learn regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Rather than jumping on this, which we really don't know where it's going at the moment and if it has any future. Meanwhile, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a pretty established fan base and community that, while hard to get into, there are quite a lot of places where you can start that are a lot more accessible. And that's kind of my whole point with these recommendations. So now it's up to you to decide, and regardless of what your decision is, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. You can also dislike now, it doesn't really matter. All the things you can do for free here on YouTube, and regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day, and it's time to duel. That was awful. Goodbye.